like to introduce Pierre Courtemanche, co-founder of 360 Platform Inc., a software solution company that provides solutions for supply chain risk. We also have here Shalabh Singhal, CEO and founder of Trademo Technologies. The subject today is transparency and traceability. And the first question I have is for Pierre. Pierre, why do you think transparency and traceability becoming increasingly crucial in today's global supply chain?
Okay, so I think that there are a few factors coming into play. First, since COVID, I think that most manufacturers realize that they cannot operate their supply chain operation in what I call in a state of supply chain blindness, knowing only their tier one supplier, but they have to have a deeper understanding and knowledge of what's going on in their supply chain beyond tier one to avoid disruption. So there's also greater stakeholder expectations like lenders, investors, regulators, and consumers for greater supply chain transparency to know what really happens, where the product come from, how they were made, what was the impact, and that translates into more stringent supply chain regulations that are more demanding on information of what is happening in the entire supply chain regarding more specifically environmental and human abuses. So all those factors contribute for this need for greater transparency, and traceability is a tactic that could contribute to greater transparency. And this is an important point because what I found during my career is that many people are confusing traceability and transparency. They think by putting in place a traceable system or solutions that they will achieve transparency. But traceability is not a goal. You don't wake up a morning and say, hey, I want to have my product traceable. It's a tactic, it's a tool. It's like one morning you wake up and say, hey, I want to have a hammer. You want to do something. You want a hammer because you want to do something with this tool. You want to fix something. You want to build something. You want to destruct something. So traceability is not at the same level of transparency. Supply chain transparency could be like the higher goal or the one of the main objectives, but definitively traceability is just a tool. It's just a tactic.
Understood. Makes sense.
I would like to, I think, add to the great point which Pierre mentioned while here that we often see people confuse between traceability, visibility, transparency kind of buzzwords that are there. And I think what I'll completely second what Pierre mentioned, that traceability is not the goal in itself. I think transparency or visibility is in the goal. And I think just to kind of describe it in other words, basically, traceability could mean collection of data on supply chains, whether upstream or downstream, for example, understanding the origin of the material of goods. And if it is downstream, how it is going to the end consumer, and basically what's happening after the end use of that particular product. Whereas transparency is more about sharing of that particular information, that intelligence between the different stakeholders. So everyone is getting visibility, everyone, whether it's your consumer, your supplier, the manufacturer, any logistics partners, they all get visibility into the supply chain, which is, I think, the goal, and which builds trust, which is needed to comply with lot many regulations today, right? So yeah, I think great point, Pierre.
Yeah, I think that we can summarize by saying that transparency, supply chain transparency, is about disclosure. It's about operating in an open way without secrets, so that people know what we're doing and what are the consequences. So this is supply chain transparency.
Got it. Got it. So question for Shalabh. in your opinion, what are the key challenges that company face when they're implementing transparency measures in their supply chains?
Yeah, and I think many challenges which we have seen practically with some of our solutions when they get deployed, whether upstream, downstream. So one big challenge is the data privacy and security itself, right? The companies are trying to protect their sensitive information, but at the same time, they're also trying to comply with all the regulations around new regulations around transparency in their supply chains. Then there are some data protection laws which conflict with those kind of things, right? The other challenge is the overall complexity of integrating any technology, like for example, blockchain, which is often a technology which is kind of suggested to build traceability in the supply chain, but that requires significant amount of investment, collaboration, I would say expertise between different stakeholders to successfully deploy that kind of solution. Then the overall fragmentation of the supply chain itself, right? It's become very difficult to get accurate data on your multiple tiers of suppliers. And that's why I think some of the supply chain mapping solutions become very important when we are talking about traceability or transparency. And there are other operational issues, like obviously everyone has its own incentive. There some degree of discretion, and there's some degree of resistance from partners who might not be willing to adopt transparency measures, right? I mean, maybe because of some kind of business incentives, right? And then maintaining the consistency in the data, the standardization in the data across the entire supply chain becomes challenging. So yeah, I think there are a couple of challenges which often need to be passed through before real transparent or traceable supply chain could be put into place.
Yeah. If I can add to this, traceability is not cheap to implement. Yeah. Let's take an example of a brand, of a group of brand in the apparel sector. Say, okay, we want to have our cotton traceable from the cotton field to our retail store. And then you have a mid-tier suppliers, let's say, that are doing some, I don't know, zipper and button and based in Bangladesh. And then they receive a request to implement a traceability system so that we know what the input materials they are buying, how they process the input materials, and link the input materials to the output materials and transportation, which is the foundation of traceability. But then this company say, wow, this is interesting, but your group of buyers represent only 3% of my annual sales. And you're asking to implement a system that will cost maybe between 80K and with running costs of 30K per year for 3% of my sale. Sorry, but I prefer to sell to somebody else. So sometimes we underestimate the economical consequence for mid-tier suppliers to implement traceability solutions that have been decided or at a higher or more downstream level.
Got it.
Yep.
So Pierre, on that, can you provide some concrete examples, something that you've seen on how the lack of transparency and traceability has led to significant risk or non-compliance issues in the supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's now on a weekly basis that we hear, a brand that has been accused of a greenwashing or that is being under investigations by some authority. I will just give the example of the WIGO Forced Labor Act in the US. It has been implemented, it started in June 22. So not even 2 years ago. And so far, I have took some note, there have been 6,315 shipments that have been confiscated at the border by custom officer that's worth over $2.2 billion. And so those goods, those shipments are suspected by the authority to include WIGO forced labor material. And it's a due diligence type of supply chain regulations that put the burden of proof on the manufacturer or the importer to prove without any doubt that it's not the case. So, and on the 2 billion, only 1 billion have been released. So still $1 billion of goods are still at the border, sitting at the borders. And companies, either importers or manufacturers, are unable to prove that with supply chain evidence that there is no WIGO involvement. Imagine the disruption that this created and the difficulty that, so who is responsible? Is it the importer or manufacturer, or is it the suppliers? So it opens the doors to many sources of litigation. Here in Canada, we'll give you another example. About 2 years ago, the government have created a role of a supply chain ombudsman. And the role of this new office is to investigate on allegation of human rights abuses in the garment, mining, oil, and gas sectors. So currently, let's say about 2 months ago, let's say the office is investigating on 21 active complaints. Those complaints include like companies like Guess, Nike, Ralph Lauren, Dynasty Gold Corporation, Gobi Mine, Walmart, Hugo Boss, and Diazol, just to give a few. So, and in Europe, it's even the company, because the level of regulation is even more demanding. There are more companies, so it's become compliance is becoming an issue, a real issue, and not talking about brand reputations and damage at brand reputations and disruptions and disinterest or from investors and lenders. So we have more and more drivers for increasing supply chain transparency. So that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just to add on that point, I think one trend that we have observed post-COVID is many of these developed markets have been the key driving factors for different procurement teams or companies worldwide, brands worldwide, to build much more transparency in their supply chain and own their supply chain. If there is a supplier in my tier 5, tier 10 level, I still kind of in a way responsible for any kind of their social labor practices, their how they are kind of managing the waste, what kind of carbon emissions there could be, right? So I cannot be ignorant of how my upstream supply chain looks like, and that doesn't give me an option to avoid any kind of such rulings or regulations, right? So now it's a necessity for any mid-size, large-size company to actually understand and know their supply chain, where transparency becomes way more important. And I think there are businesses, brands who are still figuring out the right solution based on the industry, but this is becoming more and more of compliance requirement worldwide.
Great. So Shalabh, how can organizations effectively leverage technology and data analytics to enhance transparency and traceability in their supply chains?
Yeah, I think technology plays a big role here, and I think in technology, the primary thing is to kind of capture the data and capture quality and reliable data on understanding the upstream and downstream supply chains. So now data, as for example, what Pierre referred, it becomes very challenging sometimes to convince your upstream suppliers to invest in a lot of technologies and systems, and which might be representing only a very small share of their overall business, right? So businesses do need to invest in technologies which can bring in more public data, more external data, rather than just depending on their immediate upstream suppliers to bring in all the visibility. I think Having said that, there is a lot of collaboration which is still required in different stakeholders, and even within the company itself, right? Sometimes we see that the same supplier and the information around them can be siloed in different ERPs, different systems for the same corporate, right? So the proper entity resolution and capturing the information around a supplier at one place is becoming very important, and then having collaboration with different stakeholders is very important. I think the technologies like AI and machine learning play a big role here in now when you have the data, how are you able to identify any kind of linkages, any kind of risk factors? Can you do some kind of predictive analytics on top of it? Can you do any kind of simulation on top of it to identify any kind of risk? And how do you marry this data with all the other external information? For example, it could be sanctions, it could be forced labor non-compliance. So the overall data management and AI, machine learning, entity resolution play a very big role. Then obviously, I think we need more tracking in supply chains, and that really depends if I want to trace a particular product upstream and why it is important for me. Then basically whether sensors like IoTs or RFIDs, barcode kind of technology can be used to actually basically have visibility at every stage of the life cycle of that particular product. And in some cases, in some industries, we have seen the implementation of blockchain as a decentralized ledger, where the different stakeholders have really come together to kind of build that kind of transparency, that tamper-proof record keeping to provide end-to-end visibility for all stakeholders. So I think we have seen that different solutions have been successful for different industries, and that also depends on the dynamics of that particular industry, how complex the supply chains are, how distributed they are, and still I think lot many experiments are going on, but I think we have seen companies more willing to adopt these technologies in the face of new compliances.
Yeah, so the next question is for Pierre. Pierre, what role do regulations and standards play in driving transparency and traceability initiatives across different industries?
Yeah, as I just mentioned, supply chain regulation play a huge role. It's a huge driver for transparency and disclosure. So we have seen recently in the recent years. So there have been like a kind of a shift in supply chain regulation, so a new paradigm. So before COVID, we were more in a reporting mode. So we asked a company to annually report publicly on what is happening in supply chain. The good example of those piece of legislations are the Modern Slavery Act. So the first one, I think, was adopted by California, then came UK, Australia, New Zealand. This year in Canada, since the January 1st, we have a Modern Slavery Act. So this piece of legislations are required from the company to publicly report on what they have found in the supply chain, if there is any abuses, human abuses, and what they are going to do to fix the problem by collaborations or by their own means. So, and we realize after many years that this kind of soft legislation, supply chain legislation, was not working. So we completely changed, and now we are in the due diligence mode. So company needs. I just put a note. So what is mean supply chain due diligence regulation is that demonstrate with supporting evidence that your operation and those of all supply chain actors do not violate applicable law and human rights and environmental law in the various legislations where they operate, as well as international standards. So now we say that we think that there are human and environmental abuses in your supply chain, in your entire supply chains, and there are lack of compliance. So now you need to prove to us that it's not the case, or if it's the case, what are you going to do with the other supply chain actors to address the issue? The forced labor Uyghur Act is a good example of this type of legislations where you need to prove with supply chain evidence. There is also all those new legislations on disclosure. So a few have been adopted in California recently, in the EU in just a couple of weeks ago. So again, they have the duty of due diligence. So they need to put in place, system to gather information, supply chain data, and to identify where supply chain actors are not compliant or where there are currently abuses. I don't know, just yesterday, I just read an article where BMW and Volkswagen, there's a report from the US that say that definitively, let's say that strong allegations of forced labor, Uyghur forced labor in car component. So supply chain is, and things are getting more demanding, more requiring. So I think that, and of course at the start, those new piece of legislations apply to big company or with over million or a few hundred million turnover, company with over 50,000 or 20,000 employees. But we know that those legislations, regulations will also apply in the coming years to more smaller company, and that will expand in different legislation across legislation. So a company, as I said, need to understand what is happening in their supply chain if they want to stay in business. That's full stop. This is where we are now.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to Pierre's point and to simplify a few points for our audience, I think basically when we look at ESG, environmental, social governance, right? So environmental, any kind of carbon emission, waste management, social, any kind of labor practices in your supply chain, upstream supply chain, downstream, and then governance, basically, and like any kind of cyber threats in your supply chain. So one way to look at it is that of all the major ESG concerns today, they are coming up in some form of supply chain compliances from different countries. And the regulators themselves, whether it is customs bodies or any trade regulatory bodies, they are investing a lot in technology to develop those capabilities of due diligence, not just in the immediate supplier base, but your upstream supply chain, right? So imagine any US-based importer, when they are importing a good, the US customs might already be knowing who is your upstream supply chain or upstream supplier, like at tier 4, tier 5 level, right? And this importer might be completely clueless about it. So the regulator is becoming much more data oriented, and then kind of this is why a lot of this detention is going on with forced labor and similar compliances. So it is, I think, a new paradigm for companies, whether buyers or suppliers globally, to adjust to it. I think pre-COVID, we lived in an era where we just had to understand or do diligence on our immediate trading partner, vendor, supplier, customer. But now the kind of an ESG non-compliance was discovered in the deep tier supply chains. I think this is shifting to an era where you have to do due diligence on your entire supply chain.
I can give another example. Let's take the example of gold mining by artisanal miner. Okay.
Yeah.
Of course, gold mining by artisanal miner do not comply with any international or standards or law. We estimate that at least 20% of the gold mine each year is coming from artisanal miners. But strangely, all the off-takers, let's say the car makers, the electronic devices makers, which their product content goals, even the billion gold market in London, they all claim that there is no artisanal miner gold in their product. It's 20%. It's not less than 1%. How can 20% cannot be found in consumer good product, or it makes no sense. So I think that this example explains why we are now at a due diligence duty for company. We don't say, is there any abuses? Is there any lack of compliance? Of course they are. Now it's up to you to fix the problem. It's a change in paradigm.
Yep.
Absolutely. So Shalabh, with that, are there any best practices or frameworks that companies can adopt to ensure transparency and traceability in their supply chains?
Yeah, I think I'll like to start with I think the point that I earlier also highlighted, a data standardization. So often I think the first challenge that we observe in such scenarios is that the data is not standardized for a company. It resides in different formats, different protocols across different systems, right? So if you want to enrich your supply chain, or you want to illuminate your upstream supply chain, you first of all have to start with the standardized data of your tier 1 supplier, right? So I think that is where it needs to start. And then having the as like more collaboration and having some kind of interoperable systems, right? So integrating systems within the organization and basically building more visibility within the organization on the existing data, and then expecting some degree of collaboration from your upstream suppliers on a shared platform. That is very important. I think depending on the different use cases, most critical pieces of the supply chain where there could be risk of non-compliance, one can invest in technologies like RFID, IoT sensors, blockchains. So for example, if you're sourcing from a particular country, which is particularly being investigated for any kind of forced labor non-compliances or any kind of labor practices or any kind of cyber threats, right? So you need to kind of think of blockchain and other related technologies. And I think since we are talking about more transparency and traceability without the proper data security, provenance kind of systems in place, this is like exposing more sensitive supply chain data, right? You can expose more of your data to some kind of cyber threats or unauthorized access. So whenever someone is trying to build this kind of transparency and asking for a different collaboration, it goes without a question that you need to invest in data security further. So I think these will be a couple of things which I believe could be the starting points for an organization thinking about more transparency.
Got it. So Pierre, how does transparency and traceability differ across industries such as food, e-commerce, electronics, pharmaceuticals?
Yes, they're quite at a different stage. Mainly it depends of the pressure they feel. Let's take the pharmaceutical industry. So in different legislations like the US, it is mandatory. So it's traceability, but it's even the highest level of traceability that we refer to serialization, which means that each container, each packaging unit needs to have a unique identifier. So it's the highest level of traceability requirement. Of course, when it is mandatory, you need to comply. And it is almost the only sector where you have mandatory traceability. In other sectors, as I said at the start, people are confused, and even supply chain consultant and some supply chain software vendors are adding some layers of confusions in traceability, visibility, and what we refer to chain of custody type of solution, which is not traceability at all. It has another goal. It's another type of system. But sometimes people are doing chain of custody and are claiming that they are doing traceability. So it's very difficult to benchmark and to compare the different industry, because they refer to different systems with the same the same label. There are also, the cost to implement traceability. Like in the pharma industry, they can afford serialization. They can afford it, and serialization for them was to achieve serializations at the smallest unit. They need to integrate to their production chain printer and vision equipment, which is it was a huge challenge to integrate those equipment in the production lines, not to delay or to slow down production. And so it cost a lot. Imagine that you make traceability from field, from what we often say from farm to fork, mandatory. Imagine the impact on the consumer, on the price of lettuce, if all the steps, and if you go in this case, going at the smallest unit of production would make no sense. But even at batch level, traceability at batch level will inflate the cost of consumer goods, which will make no sense. So it's very different across industry. It's really depending of the type of legislations who apply to them. You have like the new EUDR, deforestation-free regulations in Europe. Is this piece of legislation is targeting different commodities that contribute to deforestations, like soy, palm oil, coffee, cotton, lumber, and some derivative product like leather. So it means that those industry, the company in this industry, they will need to raise the bar on their traceability, not necessarily traceability, but say visibility and transparency system. But it's really and we saw I've been in this space for long, that some brand will make commitment by 2020 something, we will reach this level of, and then they never get there, and then those commitments, it's just like they just vanish and then they make a new commitment. So it's very difficult to benchmark and compare across different industries.
So Shalabh, what are some of the ethical considerations that companies need to take into account when implementing transparency and traceability measures in their supply chains?
Yeah, great question. So I think while one of the primary reasons of having more transparency or traceability in the supply chain is to make the overall supply chains more ethical, and I think that is one of the primary reasons why global regulators, whether in EU, US, Canada, they are imposing new compliances. And at the same time, I think this is also more consumer driven, where when they are kind of consuming any product today, they want to make sure that this has been ethically manufactured, right? So I think the goal of these transparency and traceability measures or technologies or systems that deploy, they should give visibility on some of the things like labor conditions, right? Basically, what kind of labor conditions are in the upstream supply chain? Are they receiving fair wages? Are the working conditions safe? There's no child labor and stuff like that. And then on the environmental impact, as for example, Pierre mentioned that there are laws which are just talking about deforestation leading from some particular set of commodities. Is there any kind of pollution or carbon emissions which is happening? Now, all of these things, I mean, they require a different kind of system investment approach. But I mean, since you asked about ethical measures, I think they become very important. Then also the community impact, like when you're sourcing any particular product getting manufactured in some facility or some region, what is the overall impact on the community of that kind of manufacturing or that kind of trade which is happening. And I think then the organizations need to think about more transparency in the reporting, right? That again, like something like while Pierre mentioned that there are claims and then those claims suddenly vanish, right? So if one needs to be transparent and in what they are reporting and how they are interpreting the data. Like, so for example, if you found some major uh, 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 major flaw in the supply chain, right? In terms of any kind of ethical practices. So is it something which is going to be highlighted, or you will try to do like some kind of greenwashing or give misleading claims? So this is a journey, and I think the true ROI of this is only when this also leads to establishment of much more ethical practices in the upstream supply chain. And I think that is where, from the consumer point of view or from the regulatory point of view, they are also aligned. Yep.
Yep. So Pierre, based on your long-term experience here, can you share a success story where a company that ensured transparency and traceability helped them avoid major risk or ensure compliance in the supply chain?
This is a very good, at the same time, a difficult question to answer. Let's focus on the traceability part. You know, I said that traceability is never about a goal. It's not a goal. So my former venture, his name is Geo Traceability, I founded it in 2011, and I sold it in 2018. I remember our first project, you know, it was in the cocoa sector, and we were working with a large trading house, and they were selling certified cocoa beans under, I think it was rainforest or fair trade. And then we implemented the traceability system. And traceability is about assurance. This is the only thing that traceability provides. A classical, typical traceability solution provide assurance. Like, for example, everybody will understand, I want to have bio product. It's the assurance that there is no contamination from non-bio product or materials in what you're selling. So it's about assurance. So in that case, the assurance was, are we selling to our customer certified beans only? And it was a large volume. It was over, if I remember well, it was over 40,000 tons of cocoa beans. And we put in place a traceability system and find out that only less than 40% of the beans were actually certified, which means that over 60% of cocoa beans were not certified, but sold as certified. So this is a good example of traceability. No organization should implement a traceability solutions before asking them some questions. What issue I want to address? And if I found something that I'm not pleased with, what am I going to do to solve it? Because it's about assurance, you cannot hide it. Once it is out of the toothpaste, you cannot replace it in the tube. So I remember this customer, when he was totally shocked, he knew that there was some contamination from non-certified cocoa beans, but not as much as 60%. He was shocked and said, what I'm going to do with my customers? I've been selling those beans for years. And then he said, okay, we will cancel our contract with you. So they stopped implementing traceability. So this is an example. So I can give another example. So I mentioned the pharmaceutical industry. So in 20s, I think it was in 2013. I think it was under the Obama administration that the FDA Drug Supply Chain Act was adopted and enforced, and it was a 10 years program or plan to have full traceability, even serialization, as I explained, in the pharma industry, from the drug manufacturer to the distributions of drugs in pharmacy, in hospitals, and other places. So they only focus on the traceability aspect, not collecting any other data. Each step has been delayed. So the last step was supposed to be met in November last year, 23. Now it has been postponed to November 24 this year. And then we will have, and it's quite complex, we can realize how complex it is to interoperate and exchange data, granular data on drugs, on shipment, on warehousing, on packaging, and you need to put the parent-child relationship between batch and lots and smaller unit. It's very complicated. You need to have a common language, common standardization of data. System needs to connect. And over 10 years, I don't know how many $1 billion have been invested, but what is the value? So at the start, the goal was to fight counterfeiting for drugs. But after 10 years, and it will take longer, at the stage where the system is delivering, what are the real benefits? I would like to question people from the industry to say if they are happy with the investment they have made. So it's not, as I said, it's not traceability. It's about what you want to achieve. Why do you want to have greater transparency? And if it is to solve problems, the traceability, if you have to choose a traceability solution in some segment of your supply chain, because I don't believe in end-to-end traceability, you need to really choose the more relevant or the hotspot, and then think about this assurance that the system will provide, and what you will do when there's a lack or there's no assurance. This is, and how you are going to report or disclose on the actions and on the situation and the actions you will take to resolve issue. So I cannot say that there was good success in my story with all the customers we had, that by implementing a traceability systems that they was like, say, wow, we achieved that. But nevertheless, I must say that because geo-traceability was not about traceability, it was about, there was this geo part. So collecting granular data on the farmers and the impact of their activities. So it means that by knowing exactly what each farmer was doing, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of farmers, each of them, what they were doing, what was their socioeconomic situation, background, what was their farming practices, their farm characteristics. It means that we were able to develop or to design tailored programs to address the need of each group of farmers having similar characteristics. Because before that, it was, across it was the same medicine for everyone. Because we didn't have the granular information on each farmer and group them on some category, women, men, young, old, with education, level of education, with access to finance, not access to finance, and tailored the approach to really meet their needs. So that was a huge benefit of traceability. But you see, it was not traceability. It was because we used traceability to collect other type of supply chain data and socioeconomic data, environmental data, and we use the traceability as the conveyor of data. Because a traceability system could also be a way to trace good, of course, but you can also trace data, trace transactions, trace, monitor changes, and impact. So this is why traceability, from my perspective, it's interesting when you collect different type of supply chain data and you use the traceability system as a data conveyors.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so my last question is for both of you gentlemen. What is your advice to the industry folks in relations to transparency or traceability in a global supply chain? We can start with Pierre.
I think it's first you need to be risk aware. First thing you need really to look at what are the compliance requirements that impact your own operations, but also the operations of your supply chain, your suppliers, not only the tier one suppliers, but across. You need to, and this is where supply chain visibility is so important, because I said that transparency is about disclosure, operating openly. Visibility is about consciousness. It's about awareness. It's about discovering your supply chain to know who is doing what, where, and how. And traceability is about assurance. So I think that company really need to understand how the supply chain operate, where are the risks, and also what are their goals, what is their corporate goal. If you want to be only compliant, that's fine. That could be more than enough. But as soon as you make commitment or pledge, say that I will put in place a responsible sourcing, or even a sustainable sourcing, or even more ethical sourcing, then you're raising the bar, which means that you will need to gather more data, more accurate, more granular, and that you will need to do something with those data. What the data will inform you, you will need to take actions. And you will need to collaborate with the other supply chain actors and the other stakeholders, like communities or local government and so on. So it's not, for many companies, it's still a kind of relationship and marketing activities. And this is where we have still, and we will see more case of greenwashing allegation and litigation. It's really about being, what I said, it's being product conscious, being product conscious. I'm selling this product. I'm selling 200 different products. I need to understand in each product what is the composition of this product, of each product, where the input materials and the raw materials are coming from, under which condition they were produced, by whom, with what impact. If you want to be product conscious, you need to have full visibility, and then meaning that you can operate and disclose in full transparency. So really define your goal, really understand how your supply chain operate, and this way you will avoid disruption, you will avoid the risk of disruption, you will avoid the risk of lack of brand reputations, you will increase the chance to get funding, you will decrease the cost of financing, and you should be able also to maintain your staff and your customer base, and even grow it. So that will be my recommendation. Define your goal and know, have more visibility on your supply chain.
Shalabh?
I think I'll just add a few points to what Pierre said, but I think he has nailed it. I think definitely setting a very clear objective on what are the goals from this particular exercise. That's definitely the first point to begin with. And in case we identify any kind of flaws, any kind of risk, or any kind of major non-compliances, so how we are going to deal with that information, right? So I think having that kind of consensus among the key stakeholders is very important. I think once that is in place, one thing which we believe generates maximum amount of ROI is to start with the supply chain mapping, and to identify maybe your top suppliers, or suppliers for some of the key commodities. Start from there. So not try to map your entire supply chain, as that could be a lot of data, a lot of signals. So start with your key commodities, or maybe commodities or suppliers where you might feel that there is more risk, and try to eliminate your supply chain. Understand what your supply chain looks like today upstream. Once you have that information in place, I think definitely try to collaborate with your suppliers more. For example, if you discover that one of your suppliers, T1 supplier, has a sanctioned entity in their tier 4, tier 5, what you're going to do with that information, how you can collaborate with your suppliers, share that information with them. Most likely they are also not aware about it, right? So having some kind of interoperable systems which can communicate with each other, where when such kind of signals are getting generated, that information is disseminated to build more trust and more visibility on both the ends. Today, you are sharing some information with your supplier. Tomorrow, if something other comes up, maybe the supplier will reciprocate with same kind of transparency. So I think having that kind of collaboration is a long-term investment. And I think businesses need to think it as a long-term investment, because definitely it will help you prepare for any kind of new compliances that come up, but it also helps mitigate a lot of risk. It can also make the businesses much more efficient. It can give you new kind of sourcing insights or procurement insights. It can help you in your carbon emissions overall management and accounting. So there are multiple benefits of building transparency and having much more resilience in the supply chain. So I think, but it's going to be a long-term regular investment, and you need to invest in your basic data infrastructure and technology.
Agree. It's a supply chain transparency. It's a journey, and of course you will make mistakes, but you would need to know where you want to go. Okay, we can give another example. More and more company are making commitment about supply chain decarbonization. Carbon reduction target, even net zero target. And of course, if you want to go to this level of decarbonization, you need to address what we refer to scope 3, which is the emission of the entire supply chain, not your own operations, but your suppliers and their suppliers and the transportation and everything. And how can you be credible saying that you have achieved scope 3? And we see that from time to time on magazine, the news, on LinkedIn, on other social media or company website. We have achieved scope 3, or we will achieve scope 3 by 2 or 3 years. And then if you ask those companies, say, who are your supply chain actors, where they are, what are the operation? They don't know. How can you be credible saying that you can address scope 3 if you don't know your supply chain? So for me, it's a nonsense. And I think that this is a very slippery road that companies are engaged to, and they will face greenwashing allegations and very, very soon. So again, it's about, before making statements, making pledges, making commitments, discover your supply chain. I will finish like that. I will close like that. Please discover what is happening in your supply chain.
Pierre, Shalabh, this has been highly educational. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you. It was quite a very good conversation. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.